The Amerks, the Worlds, and Henri Jokiharju. He's next up in our exit interviews. All of that ahead here on the Locked On Sabres podcast.
Your Locked On Sabres, your daily podcast on the Buffalo Sabres. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And what is up, and welcome to the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube. We are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. A lot to get to on today's show. We continue to be Locked On Amerks. So we've got a recap of Amerks and Bears game 2 and 3 and 4 coming your way. Actually, just 3 and 4 coming your way in a little bit here. And also look ahead to a pivotal game 5 as the Amerks now find themselves playing elimination hockey. We also have a recap of the World Championships for you. And what about Henri Jokiharju? He's next up in our exit interview series as we are breaking down now the Sabres defenseman. He is next up after the big 3 that we went through on our last show. If you missed our last show, check it out wherever you're listening to this podcast, YouTube channel, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or on the Odyssey app. Owen Power, Matthias Samuelsson, and Rasmus Dahlin. We went through them all on our last show. The Rochester Americans fall 4-2 in game 4 on Monday night to the Hershey Bears on home ice. And this was after the Amerks had a 2-goal lead with 10 minutes to go, final 10 minutes, and the game didn't even get to overtime. The Bears pushed it all the way to a 4-2 lead with an empty netter adding on as the fourth to win it in regulation. What an implosion by the Amerks. They had it. Now, I kind of almost don't want to go all the way with implosion because the Amerks got thoroughly outplayed and dominated for 2 periods. The second and third, almost in their entirety, the Amerks were just run over. Gave up a lot of power plays. They were getting dominated 5-on-5, and they just could not generate any offensive zone time. The only reason they were in that game and that they had a lead in that game was, simply put, that they had Malcolm Subban standing on his head. Malcolm Subban was playing out of his mind. He was the reason that they were in that game and that they were leading that game 2-0. But the Bears got through. Now, hey, it might have helped if you had a really young, dynamic offensive force up front, or the potential for that at the very least. But Seth Appert decided to healthy scratch Matthew Savoie, the Sabres' top 10 pick from the 2022 draft. He's been with the team, played in games 2 and game 3. And I thought, he wasn't great. Like, he disappeared a lot in those, but he was playing on the fourth line, an offensive skill player. What do you expect? And his feet were getting under him. You might expect, hey, game 3, he kind of, all right, he's getting used to it now. Now he's going to get going. Now, and he didn't get the chance to. So I disagreed with the idea to sit Savoie in large part too, because we want to see this guy play. Everyone wants the same thing. I saw a lot of, again, Sabres Twitter versus Amerks Twitter, just crimes against each other that didn't need to be happening. Everybody wants the same thing. I truly believe that. And everyone's heart of heart, everyone wants the same thing. They want the Amerks to win. But you have different ideas of how to go about that. Certain Amerks fans think, hey, we'll just keep the team together. Don't interrupt the chemistry, which it's not even really an Amerks Sabres question for me. It's you think chemistry is the reason why they're gotten this far? Bad teams have chemistry. This team has gotten this far because they have young offensive talent through the lineup, especially with Jiri Kulich. They have a great AHL goaltender in Malcolm Subban, and they got gifted a really good European defenseman in Lawrence Pilot that, let's face it, he's probably not, he's a tweener, right? He's not quite good enough to be a regular in the NHL. He's too good for the AHL. I mean, he's been playing in the KHL and doing well at it. And KHL, I mean, if you look at different statistical models, from like stat translations and whatnot, KHL is a little bit above the AHL. So this guy is probably playing a little bit above his pay grade. So you got a number one defenseman in Lawrence Pilot, who has been great. Subban's been great. Kulik's been great. The Amerks, like, they have talent littered throughout the lineup. They're here because of their talent. Let's not kid anybody. Now, Savoie has talent. And I just think that, like, for me, again, it's not a Sabre thing. And, like, I want to see him develop, and any of these big, meaningful games can help him. But it's a couple games. It's not going to make or break his career. Why do you want to see Savoie in there? Because he's fun, young, offensive, dynamic. And if you watch those second and third period for the Amerks last night, wasn't that the exact thing they were missing? They were missing another guy that could drive some offensive play and drive some offensive zone time, get the puck out of the defensive zone for a little bit. So I was really disappointed to see that Savoie was not playing. I wonder if he will play in Game 5. To this point, there's no indication whether that's going to happen or not back in Hershey, as the Amerks now trail 3-1 in that series. Ryan Johnson also, by the way, signs with the Amerks over the weekend. I want to break him down a little bit more in depth on a future show, probably on our next show. He could play Game 5 as well. I feel like he's less likely, though, than Savoie. Putting him in an elimination game, just getting his feet wet, that might be a little much. So I might want to guess Johnson doesn't get in, but I think Savoie could. But we'll see. But I would put Savoie back in. One other thing on the Amerks series right now. We're now 4 games through the Amerks and Bears series, and it's pretty safe to say Yuri Kulik and Isaac Rozan are not having good series. They are not producing at the same rate offensively. They are not carrying possession as much as they typically do. They're not finishing their chances. It's tough competition. It's deep in the playoffs. They've played great in the playoffs up until this point, Kulik especially. So I'm not worried by any means, but it's, to be frank, you have to call a spade a spade. They're not having a good series at this moment in time. So Amerks versus Hershey Bears. That will be on Wednesday night. So hopefully the Amerks are able to push that another game further, get it back to Rochester, and then they could force a Game 7, because nobody wants to see this magical run end for Roch. All right, we'll take a timeout here when we come back. How about the World Championships? There's a lot going on at the Worlds that are now over, but 2 guys stood out for the Sabres, and I'm going to use the Worlds as a reason to be excited for them, even more so for next season. That's coming up here on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase, and we are presented by eBay Motors. For a championship team, it's all about making sure every player is a perfect fit. It's the same when it comes to your vehicle. Every part needs to fit just right. So the next time you need parts and accessories, head to eBay Motors. With eBay Guaranteed Fit, you can be sure every part you need fits right the first time around. Just add your ride to My Garage, the My Garage app, and look for the green check to know the part will fit, or your money back. Because just like in sports, confidence is the name of the game when you shop on eBay Motors. And with over 122 million parts to choose from, you'll be back in the game in no time. After all, it's easy to bring home a win with the right parts are a guarantee. Get the right parts, the right fit, and the right prices on ebaymotors.com. Let's ride. eBay Guaranteed Fit, only available to U.S. customers. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. Thanks for making us your first listen every day. The World Championships are over, and it was a thrilling gold medal game. Canada defeats Germany by a score of 5-2, and they win gold. Canada winning another hockey tournament, gold medal. Not a surprise there. We got to get back to the Olympics. Those Team USA can take them down, because I know they will. But Canada gets the win over Germany, avenging a loss a couple of years ago in a medal game to Germany. Big upset. So big win for them, but not the story of the tournament, although we'll get to a couple players from Canada. The story of the tournament for the Sabres easily is JJ Peterka. JJ Peterka for Germany, 12 points in 10 games. He tied for the second in the entire tournament on any team for points, and he was named the tournament's forward of the tourney. Best forward at the tournament. JJ Peterka took home that honor. He was unbelievable beginning to end. He was the main driver of all that was happening for Germany. And man, the speed on display, the hands on display. Now, One thing I do want to take note of with Peterka and the Worlds that I think is worth keeping track of. Notice how well he played and what style of tournament it was. The Worlds, these guys are going after it. Don't get me wrong. It's not a preseason tournament or exhibition match, but the physicality is not near the NHL level. A lot of these guys are NHL players or even European players that have just had their seasons end. They don't want to be, they don't want to be crushing each other. And with that lack of physicality, Peterka thrived. So in that way, it's not quite the same you'll see back at the NHL level. It's nice to see him take advantage of open ice, and he did that all tournament long. What will come next for Peterka is figuring out how to do what he did at the Worlds when there are guys trying to take your head off, when you're getting out-muscled by defensemen that are 4 inches bigger than you. That will be the next challenge for J.J. Peterka. Peterka with 12 points in 10 games. Jack Quinn with a phenomenal tournament as well, scored a big goal in the semifinal match. He was terrific throughout the entire tournament as an offensive force for Canada. Peyton Krebs for Canada kind of slid back into that defensive role. Quinn was driving offensive play. Quinn and Peterka, they're on the same line with Cousins. And Dylan Cousins, if you remember last year, was great at the World Championships. And it got talked about a lot in the summer leading into his season. And I made this point about Peterka and Quinn when I did my exit interviews about them a little bit after the season ended, that can they take the same jump or something similar to what Cousins did? Cousins had 38 points in 2021-22, then had an amazing World Championships, and he rode that right into this past season where he had 68 points. He doubled his point total. Can Peterka and Quinn do the same thing? Quinn especially. Quinn is very similar on every level to Cousins. Top 10 pick, 8th overall. In fact, I think Cousins was 7th, Quinn was 8th, and Cousins had 38 points in his age 21 season. Quinn had 37 points this past year. Then they dominated and were played great at the World Championships. Then you ride that into the next year. Well, that's where Quinn's at. What's the next year look like? Because, man, if he could take a Cousins level jump, that World Championship tournament that Quinn just had has me thinking all about the jump Cousins just had. I think Quinn is the number one candidate to take that leap, even despite the fact that Peterka was named, again, tournament MVP for forwards. Maybe Peterka could take that jump as well, though. I mean, his trajectory a little slower, I think, than those guys because he was a second-round pick, and I do think that matters a little bit. 32 points as opposed to higher 30s, only 12 goals as opposed to a little bit higher for Cousins and Quinn. And he had the big middle portion of his age 21 season where he just did absolutely nothing. And Quinn and Cousins would disappear for a little bit, but not as long as Peterka did. So I think Quinn's more likely to take that leap, but both he and Peterka gave you signs that they are capable of doing that and doing that right now. And it was the play they had at the World Championships. Devin Levi only got the one game in. That's a huge disappointment. Not his fault. I don't know why Canada didn't play him. Sam Montembeault played a ton throughout the tournament. How about Latvia, by the way? Shout out to Latvia. They won bronze over Team USA. And when they arrived, the team arrived home, it looked like 5 million people were there to greet the team at the airport. Latvia is hockey crazed, I guess. They just, to be frank, I guess just aren't really good at it. No offense, I guess. But they're just not very good at it. So another World Championships in the books. And Canada takes gold. Timeout here when we come back. Henri Jokiharju. He's next up in our exit interview series. Kind of a tough one, Jokiharju. But we'll try when we come back here on the Locked On Sabres podcast with Joe DiBiase. And we are presented by Athletic Greens. Athletic Greens is the way I start my day every morning. It depends, though. Sometimes I'll do the shakes. More often, I feel like I'm doing the shakes lately. You throw them in. I've got a blender. I have one of those, those bottle blenders where all you do is hit the button. It's super easy. You just put the crushed ice in. You put the water in. You don't have to use crushed ice with AG1, but I do. A third of a glass of crushed ice. Fill it halfway with water and put 1 scoop of AG1 in there. Hit the button, and it's ready in 10 seconds, and it tastes great. It's like a smoothie in the morning. It's got that green color, so when you're walking around, everyone's like, ooh, that guy eats healthy. And you are eating healthy because with AG1, you're getting all the vitamins and minerals that you need, but all in one whole food source, superfood, probiotic, and adaptogen to help start your day right. AG1 is lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free. It's less than $3 per day. Athletic Greens, over 7,000 5-star reviews. For every purchase, they donate to organizations helping to keep nutritious food to kids in need, including No Kid Hungry here in the U.S. The shakes taste great. If you're not feeling like a shake in the morning, I just want my water, I just want my coffee, get the little dropper out. They get the little glasses of all the same, all goody vitamins and minerals. One drop in your water or coffee, you don't even notice it's there. You'll forget about it in a heartbeat, but you're getting all those nutrients. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of this immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs for on the go with your first purchase. All you got to do, visit athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/NHL Network. Take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Sneaky Joe DiBiase back here to wrap things up here in the Locked On Sabres podcast, and it is the next edition of our exit interview series. Next up on our show for you everydayers, by the way, we will talk Amerks once again. We'll talk Ryan Johnson now being in the fold for next year with the Sabres after signing his contract, and Jack Eichel versus Sam Reinhart in the Stanley Cup final. We have till Saturday for that, but we're going to talk about it on our next show. Henri Jokiharju, he's next up in our exit interview series. He is a tough one to break down because he doesn't have a flashy game. You could go games at a time without noticing him. And unlike I just mentioned with Peterka, where he disappeared for a month, if you don't notice Peterka, that's a problem, the style of player he is. If you don't notice Henri Jokiharju, a lot of times that's a good thing. Depends. Jokiharju last season, he saw his minutes go down, but not overly dramatically, but a significant drop. Say played 60 games both of the last 2 years, so injuries right off the bat here are a bit of a concern. He's missed 44 games in the last 2 seasons combined. That's a lot. You'd like that number to come down. You'd like him to be missing 5 to 10 games on a given year instead of 20 plus, which is what he's done in each of the last 2 seasons. He's not yet played 70 games in a season. He's been in the league since 2018, and he's a full-time NHLer, and he has not yet played 70 games in a season in 5 years. He went down from 21 minutes and 53 seconds of ice time per night in 21-22 to this past year, 22-23, 21 minutes and 1 second. He went down 52 seconds of ice time per night. A lot of that was he spent almost no time on the top pair when Mattias Samuelsson was healthy. When Mattias Samuelsson was not healthy, he got some minutes up with Dahlin. Not as much as you might think. There was a lot of Kel Clegg up there for some reason. But Jokiharju got some minutes up with Dahlin. But for the most part, his most common line mate all year was Owen Power. He was Owen Power's guy. And you know what? It kind of worked. Power got, I think, really good results out of Jokiharju in comparison to the previous season. His expected goals for percentage at 5-on-5, Jokiharju's, went up by 3 whole percentage points. He went from 45% to 48%. So pretty good on that front. But I think where everyone lands with Jokiharju is the right place to land. And that is, this is a third pair defenseman. It is. They tried him out as a number 1 pair guy with Rasmus Dahlin, and it just wasn't clicking. He wasn't keeping up. Then, all right, put him down with Owen Power. He could be the number 2, a second pair guy, right? You could do better. You could do worse, but you could do better. He's okay. Third pair. That is the sweet spot for Henri Jokiharju. Now, the key will be for the Sabres replacing him. I mean, he really is the guy to replace this offseason, to upgrade from, and bump him down to the third pair and be in a rotation, maybe even with Ilya Lyubushkin and Riley Stillman, who we'll talk about coming up soon. They'll be next up in exit interviews. But Jokiharju on the third pair as a right shot third pair guy that can bump up if you need him to. That's the thing. Like, their depth was challenged. Kel Clegg going up to the top pair after 1 injury. You can't have that happen. But if you slot Jokiharju in on the third pair, and that's where he plays, but you know what? If there's an injury to Samuelsson or there's an injury to Power or Dahlin, and I got to bump him up to one of the top 2 pairs, you could do worse. And that's where depth comes from. I think Jokiharju has a future on this team as a depth defenseman. He's not anything flashy. He's not super fast. He's not all that big. He's only 6 foot, 200 pounds. He doesn't have crazy hands. He doesn't have a blistering shot. He's just kind of got, decent skills all around. And he's a smart defenseman. I think he makes good tape-to-tape passes. He does turn the puck over a little bit more than you'd like. But for the most part, he's a smart defenseman that understands the game. But I think you're left wanting a little bit from Jokiharju in the role that he's been. 3 goals, 10 assists, 13 points, by the way, on the season. You're getting no power play minutes, penalty killer. You'd like him to be a little bit better on the penalty kill as well. But again, I think this is a third pair guy. So it's not right, I think, to expect a ton from him. They won the trade. They traded Alex Nylander, who's not even in the NHL, to get Jokiharju. So, Jason Botterill, you got one. You won that trade way back in the day. So that's really all there is on Jokiharju as a player. Again, there's really not a lot to him. He's kind of there. He does his job most times. You probably want him to do it a little bit better, and you'd like him to get bumped down a spot. Now, contract is the one other thing with Jokiharju. He is 23 years old. Still young, but experienced, right? Like we're talking, almost 300 games in the NHL now at this point. He's going into the final year of his contract at $2.5 million, and then he's a restricted free agent. Personally, I think he's a guy you don't pay until he hits restricted free agency. Middlestat, we've talked about paying early. Power, Dahlin, of course, paying early. I think Jokiharju, you let him play out the final year of his contract and you make a call at the end of that. See what he does as a third pair defenseman. Make sure you like him in that role and see what his season is like. I think you wait to pay Jokiharju until next season. Paying him a year early makes it sound like he's a core piece of the team. And we are not there with Henri Jokiharju. All right, next up, Stillman and Lyubushkin. But next up on this show, Jack Eichel versus Sam Reinhart in the Stanley Cup Final. Panthers and Golden Knights. Amerks as well, and much more to get to here on the Locked On Sabres podcast. At Sneaky Joe Sports. Check us out on our YouTube channel, comment section there, or you can tweet at us at Locked On Sabres. All the ways to get a hold of the show. Thanks everybody for listening to the Locked On Sabres podcast, making us your first listen every day, and we'll talk to you next time, you everydayers here on Locked On Sabres.